Meeting called to order. Can we have the roll?
Danielle Bailey.
Here.
Tyler Robinson.
Here.
Greg Strike.
Here.
Brian Looney.
Here.
Jared Gardner.
Here, sorry.
Herod O'Quinn.
Here.
Seth Anderson and Andre Spinelli are excused. Thank you.
And is there a motion to approve the minutes?
So moved.
Moved by Commissioner Strike, seconded by Commissioner Looney. Any objections? Motion passes. Disclosures. Commissioner Gardner?
None.
Commissioner O'Quinn?
None.
Commissioner Robinson?
None.
Commissioner Strike?
None.
Commissioner Looney?
None.
And I also have no disclosures. Moving on to our next item of business, public hearing, case 2019-00112. And I will read the procedures by which the public may speak in the to the commission at its meeting. After the staff presentation is completed on public hearing items, the chair will ask for public testimony on the issue. Persons who wish to testify will follow the time limits established in the commission rules of procedure. Petitioners, including all of his or her representatives, will receive 10 minutes. Part of this time may be reserved for rebuttal. Representative of groups, such as community councils, PTAs, etc., will receive 5 minutes. Individuals will receive 3 minutes. When your testimony is complete, you may be asked questions by the commission. You may only testify once on any issue unless questioned by the commission. An individual may have appeal rights relating to any action the Planning and Zoning Commission takes, except for commission recommendations to the Assembly, which are not appealable. Appeals must be filed with the clerk's office within 20 days after approval by Planning and Zoning Commission of the resolution, which is the commission's final decision. A fee for appeal is required at the time of filing. Staff, can we hear a report?
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is a request to change the land use designation for approximately 4 acres in the 2006 Chuyaki River Comp Plan Update Land Use Plan Map from commercial to industrial. The comprehensive plan amendment will allow for a corresponding rezone from CERO and CEB3 respectively to CEI1, and that'd be case 2019-0080 being heard later tonight. The Planning Department is recommending approval for this corresponding rezone. The Planning Department has reviewed the request for the comp plan amendment and presents the following findings. As far as the approval criteria, A1, the change in projections or assumptions from those based on which the comp plan is based. The criteria is met. The proposed rezoning responds to emergent information indicating a substantial need for additional industrial land supply. The industrial land deficits and commercial land surpluses in Chuyaki River and the municipality as a whole have become documented by 3 land market assessment studies that the municipality conducted between 2012 and 2016. And these include the Anchorage Commercial Land Assessment completed in 2012, the Anchorage Industrial Land Assessment Update completed in 2015, and the Anchorage Employment and Non-Residential Land Need Forecast completed in 2016. For approval criteria II, identification of new issues, needs, or opportunities that are not adequately addressed in the comprehensive plan. The criteria is met. The petitioners are seeking a rezone of a parcel that is currently designated as commercial in the Chuyaki River Comprehensive Plan Update. This will require a comprehensive plan amendment and a rezoning. The rezoning is being processed concurrently with this comprehensive plan amendment. The plan recognizes that land use plan map amendments may be needed in response to community growth and change. For criteria A, 3 little I, the criteria is not applicable, and same for A4, criteria is not applicable. For criteria B, the criteria is met. The proposed amendment is consistent with the comprehensive plan. This redesignation of the land use plan map from commercial to industrial will allow development for an exclusively industrial use. The surrounding land uses as indicated in the land use plan map in the Chuyaki River Comprehensive Plan are designated as commercial and industrial. The amendment will not necessitate a change to other components of the plan to maintain internal consistency. For criteria C, the criteria is met. The redesignation of the subject parcel to industrial is not detrimental to the public interest. The proposed redesignation is aligned with the designation of adjacent development. And for criteria D, the criteria is met. This comp plan amendment is supported by the three following comprehensive plan goals, objectives, and policies, and that'd be Goal 3D1, Objective 3D2D, and Policy 3D3D. For approval criteria E, the criteria is met. In the 2006 Chugaki River Comprehensive Plan Update Land Use Plan Map identifies the site as commercial, so an accompanying amendment to the comprehensive plan to change the land use designation to industrial is required. It is important to note that the land use plan map is not intended as a fixed predetermination of future land use. It is intended to be updated and amended as the community continues to grow and change. It's also compliant with the locational criteria for the I-1 district within the Chugaki River Comprehensive Plan, and that'd be locational criteria 1, 2, and 3. And I can go further into that when we discuss the rezone case. But for this comprehensive plan amendment, the department is recommending approval. And with that, that concludes my presentation. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Just as a housekeeping matter, were you hoping for us to consolidate the first two cases, or were you hoping we would hear those separately?
Madam Chair, I believe they have to be heard separately. It's just as a process matter, the comprehensive plan amendment has to be decided on first before the rezone.
All right, thank you. Any questions for staff? Commissioner Strike?
I know we've got two cases here, and just help me out here. Could we have accomplished, or could the petitioner have accomplished the same thing by just getting a conditional use?
Through the chair, this development that they have in mind requires a replat, and the intended use for it, I don't believe could be accomplished through a conditional use. I believe a rezone is the only option for them.
Because we're not seeing the replat here tonight.
That's correct. I don't believe the replat is going before this body. It's going before the planning board, and the date I'm not certain on.
But conversely, they could have brought the replat here to this commission and done everything all tonight.
Through the chair, I believe a replat could be heard as part of a site plan review, but I don't believe it could be heard as part of a rezone.
It just,
Or it could be, I take that back. It could be heard as part of a rezone, but it isn't tonight.
okay. So back to my original question. You don't know, but it's possible. I thought they could have accomplished the same thing with a conditional use. They wouldn't have had to involve the Eagle River community, do the change in the comprehensive plan and the rezone.
Through the chair, I don't believe that's correct.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions for staff? Seeing no other questions, can we hear from the petitioner? And if you could let us know if you'd like to reserve any time for rebuttal after you introduce yourself.
Yeah, I'd like to reserve 2 minutes. My name is Brad Rinke. I'm the survey manager for Bell & Associates. We're the petitioner's representative in this case. I don't have any comments on the comprehensive plan amendment. We'll do a brief presentation with the rezone.
Any questions for the petitioner? All right. Anyone else wishing to speak on the matter? All right, you have your 2 minutes left for rebuttal if you would like to use them. I actually believe you have 8 minutes and 7, oh, and, yeah, 9 minutes and 53 seconds. So I think that's a record. Any other questions from the commission for the petitioner, now that we've heard from all of the rest of the public comments? All right, and what is the will of the body? Commissioner Strike? Oh. Commissioner Gardner?
So in the matter of case number 2019-0112, a request to amend the 2006 Chugaki Eagle River Comprehensive Plan Update Land Use Plan Map, I would move to approve the plan amendment.
seconded by Commissioner Looney. Would you like to speak to your amendment, or to your motion?
Yeah, just generally, it seems to me that the approval criteria as identified in the staff report are satisfied. And in particular, it looks like there is a newly recognized need for industrial land, both within the municipality broadly and more narrowly within Chugiak Eagle River. And there's a commercial land surplus as well. And it also looks like this would be consistent with the surrounding uses, and it has quick access to the Glen Highway. And I guess just as another finding, I would just note that we didn't receive any public testimony this evening.
Anyone else wanting to speak to the motion before a vote? All right, call for a vote. And that motion passes. All right, moving on to case 2019-0080. Can we hear the staff report?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. AYI Realty LLC, together with Preston and Kathy Peppers, are requesting to rezone 7 parcels of land totaling plus or minus 4 acres from CERO, so that's Chugiak Eagle River Residential Office, and CEB3, Chugiak Eagle River General Business, respectively, to CEI1, Chugiak Eagle River Light Industrial. The petition site is located east of the Eagle River, north and west of Eagle View Drive, and south of Poppy Lane in Eagle River. The applicant would like to develop the petition site into a facility that will serve a light manufacturing use. A local Anchorage-based business has expressed interest in relocating their shop within the petition site. Development is likely to occur in the summer or fall of 2019, pending the completion of a replat, and there are no special limitations imposed on this property, nor are we proposing any through this rezone. The Planning Department has reviewed the application and presents the following findings. In regards to the approval criteria for a rezone, for approval criteria 1, criteria is met. This rezone will result in a development of 7 vacant parcels suitable for the location of a light industrial use. According to the 2015 Anchorage Industrial Land Assessment Update, there is a shortage of industrial land within the Chugiak Eagle River area and the municipality as a whole. This rezone will convert undeveloped surplus commercial land into industrial land to facilitate the development of additional manufacturing sites within the municipality. There is compatible zoning of CEI1 and CEB3 to the north and south of the site. In addition, the site is bordered by the Glen Highway to the east, which allows for a high degree of exposure to daily vehicular traffic. For criteria 2, the criteria is met. The 2006 Chugiak Eagle River Comprehensive Plan Update land use plan map identifies this site as commercial, so an accompanying amendment to the comprehensive plan to change the land use designation to industrial is required. It is important to note that the land use plan map is not intended as a fixed predetermination of future land use. It is intended to be updated and amended as the community continues to grow and change. This rezone request from CEB3 and CERO to CEI1 is consistent with the comprehensive plan and the locational criteria for an industrial district. In addition, it's compatible with the following goals, objectives, and policies of the Chugiak Eagle River Comprehensive Plan, which is Goal 3D1, Objective 3D2D, and Policy 3D3D. For approval criteria 3, the criteria is met. This rezone is consistent with the purpose of the CEI1 Industrial Zoning District. This rezone will facilitate the future development of vacant land for a planned light manufacturing facility. The proposed development is located within an area that is in need of additional industrial lands. Because the land is currently vacant, any new developments will be constructed in compliance with current land use and building codes. For approval criteria 4, the criteria is met. This rezone is compatible with surrounding zoning districts and existing development surrounding the petition site. The proposed CEI1 zoning is compatible with the surrounding commercial and light industrial zoning, which neighbors the site to the north, south, and east. and this development will bring much-needed manufacturing capacity to the Chugach Eagle River area. For approval criteria 5, the criteria is met. The petition site is currently being accessed via Eagle View Drive and Poppy Lane. Both Eagle View Drive and Poppy Lane are classified as local streets, which see less than 2,000 vehicular trips daily. Public water and sewer service are not available to these parcels. The petition site is within the police service area, fire service area, the Chugach, Birchwood, Eagle River Rural Road service area, and the Eagle River Chugach Park and Recreation service area. But it is outside the building safety service area, and public transportation is not available to the petition site. Approval criteria 6, the criteria is met. The proposed rezone is unlikely to adversely impact the existing natural environment. While some vegetation clearing is anticipated, municipal code places preference on using existing vegetation and trees to achieve compliance with any and all landscaping requirements. In addition to landscaping requirements, this site may be required to construct roads which meet the minimum requirements of Title 21 and Title 23 at the time a land use permit is applied for. Along with constructed roadways, this site will also be required to install all necessary utilities, including stormwater and drainage facilities. This site will ultimately be taking access from Eagle View Drive, which is within the right-of-way of the Glen Highway, but is classified as a local street, seeing between 2,000 and 10,000 vehicular trips per day. It is unlikely that the additional traffic generation to this site will increase the adverse impacts to the surrounding natural environment. While there may be noise originating from the site during any future development activity, site operations will not be permitted to exceed noise control standards of Anchorage Municipal Code, Title 15, Section 70. Approval criteria 7, the criteria is met. The petition site encompasses 7 parcels. All parcels, with the exception of Lot 61, are undeveloped. The site is accessed via local streets, which run through established commercial and industrial districts to access the subject parcels. Single-family homes which border the site to the west will be screened by L2 buffer landscaping, which any new development within the petition site will need to install along lot lines that abut a residentially zoned lot. In addition, L1 visual enhancement landscaping will need to be installed along the abutting rights-of-way. This landscaping will help soften the streetscape and improve the aesthetics of the proposed industrial site. The Planning Department does not anticipate adverse impacts upon adjacent land uses as a result of this rezone, nor does it see a need to add stipulations to the approval of this rezone request. For approval criteria 8, the criteria is met. The 2006 Chugach Eagle River Comprehensive Plan Land Use Plan map classifies the petition site as commercial. Although this rezone request differs from the site's land use designation, this rezone will not exacerbate an undesired land use pattern. Surrounding zoning is predominantly commercial and light industrial. By rezoning this parcel to CEI1, the resulting land uses will be better utilized by expanding the amount of available industrial land within the municipality. And approval criteria 9 is met. This rezoning will not result in a split zone lot. And the Planning Department finds that the approval criteria for a rezone is met, and the Department recommends approval of the rezoning from CERO and CEB3 district to CEI1. And with that, I'll be happy to answer any questions. So thank you, Madam Chair.
Commissioner Strike.
Thank you, and through the chair. Thank you again for that. Typically, one of the things we see when we see the rezoning, we see what was able to be done on the property based on the current zoning, and then the new zoning, what is proposed. So we're moving from the business district into a light industrial, commercial to light industrial. My concern right now might be what other possible unintended consequences there might be from that new zoning, especially as this property abuts a residential property. So right now we know the planned use, it's stipulated what they're planning to do. Doesn't necessarily mean it's what they're going to do. But this zoning puts do we put any other parameters out here? What are some of the unintended consequences of this rezoning that might impact the other areas? This particular use may not be an unintended consequence. It may be right. But are there other uses in the light industrial that could disrupt this flow?
Through the chair, Commissioner Strike, I mean, you're absolutely correct. This is the planned use right now is to do a light manufacturing facility. That plan could fall through, and it could be something else. I will say I don't know the Planning Department would support a rezone to I-2, just given the more industrial nature of an I-2, heavy industrial nature of I-2. Most of the uses within an I-1 are going to be enclosed.
One of the concerns I have, for example, is I know that there's a demand out there and folks are looking for property to do lay-down yards, to move impounded vehicle storage. Is that an allowable use on this property with this change?
Through the chair,
Go ahead. Which goes to the basis of my initial question earlier. Might this have been better resolved through a conditional use?
through the chair, again, conditional use is not a possibility for this development. Light manufacturing is just prohibited in the B3. So it's not you can't accomplish it through a conditional use. In terms of the impound yard, an impound yard is a permitted use in the CEI-1. Motor freight terminal is a permitted use in the CEI-1. General manufacturing is cottage crafts, commercial food production, storage yard. There's multiple uses that can go into light industrial. We have use-specific standards that try and mitigate those impacts. We also have landscape standards that try and break up the visual buffer between those uses. But in terms of what's more impactful, that is also very subjective as well.
Well, and it's not having anyone testifying. I didn't see anything from the Eagle River Chugach Community Council, unless I missed it. And that's the unintended consequences that I'm concerned about, that all of a sudden we are, if what's built is what's proposed, I think it's great. But if it's not, even with all the other considerations you can do, with all the buffers that we do, with all the landscaping and so forth, and it's that one or two or three type of uses that might prevail here, all of a sudden sneaks in. You don't have control over it now. That's my concern.
Through the chair, and that's noted, and you're correct, the Chugach River Community Council and Advisory Board did not submit comments on this case either.
Do you think that they would have responded if this was going to be a holding yard, junk yard for impounded vehicles?
I can't speak for the Community Council.
It's a rhetorical question, but my gut says they probably would have responded. Thank you.
Commissioner Looney?
Actually, I was going to expand a little bit on Commissioner Strike's concern or his observations, and hopefully the petitioner can address this. The Anchorage Health Department noted that the noise generated from this new zoning may impact the other residential and residential office properties that are adjacent, but they all are subject to the municipal noise standards, AMC 1570. But hopefully we can hear what the petitioner has planned.
Commissioner O'Quinn?
So I'm looking at the map in the parcel to the south, immediately south, catty corner to the subject parcel is zone CEI 1SL. Does staff have information about what the special limitations are for that parcel?
Through the chair, Commissioner Quinn, I can't recall. I know I did review that. If my memory serves me correct, it was not a restriction on the uses. It was more in the lines of impacts to Eagle River itself.
Thanks.
Any other questions for staff? Can we hear from the petitioner?
Again, my name is Brad Rinke. I'm with Bell & Associates, and we're the petitioner's representative in this case tonight. I want to thank staff for a comprehensive review of the project and the staff packet. There's just a few points I wanted to kind of reiterate. The project does meet all 9 criteria specified by code and is approved by staff. The lot is adjacent to similarly zoned I-1 property and B3. Again, MOA and especially ER, I-1 zoning property is at a shortage, and this will help resolve that. The project's close proximity to the Glen Highway provides for good access for the businesses and will not create any traffic issues. The provided development, or the proposed development does provide a needed business in the ER area and will create 10 to 15 new jobs. The project promotes a long-term development and growth. The site has physical and legal access and is able to have telecom, electric, and gas utilities to the site. And finally, the rezone will have no effect on the adverse effect on the site. I do have the proposed developer, Dave Malibus, here. Maybe it's, and he can maybe answer your question on the noise issue for Mr. Looney. And as far as the community council goes, a member of Bell and Associates did meet with the community council, present the case. We did submit a letter with our staff packet, or with our project, and that must be not made it into the staff packet, but we did talk to them, and they approved of the project. So unless you have any other questions, I'll save my time for rebuttal, but maybe the proposed developer can answer the noise question.
And just as a clarification, there is the Eagle River Community Council report on page 23 of our staff packet. Any questions for petitioner, Commissioner Strike?
That was my question looking for, but, well, yes. So we don't have a document or a letter from the community council. Was staff given one? Did you say?
No, we didn't get a document directly from them. No, just a summary of the meeting.
Any other questions for the petitioner?
The next question will be about the noise. I want to follow up with Mr. Looney's.
If you want to, if you could state your name for the record as well, please.
My name is Dave Mabius, and I'm the owner of a company called Signco, operating out of Anchorage. I think one of the points I would like to make addressing the vehicles, the junk vehicles, and I could be wrong on this, but I'm thinking the difference between I-1 and I-2 is that I-2 allows those vehicles where I-1 doesn't. Does anybody know?
I think we heard from the staff that they said that would be an allowable use,
Oh,
like an impound.
Yeah. Okay. Well, the noise level. I can talk to you about my business. What my plan is to move my sign company. I'm on Commercial Drive right now, and my plan is to move it to Eagle River. I've lived in Eagle River since 1989. And I'd like to have my business there, and this has given me the opportunity to do that. So that's really what it's all about. That's my plan. That's my full intent. We're going through with design on that. The noise level, I mean, generally, we're not working after 6 o'clock at night. We're just a 8 to 5 Monday through Friday business.
And I think that's probably one of the concerns, is that since it's adjacent to a residential, commercial has different operating hours throughout the city for whether you have compressors or you have other type of operating equipment.
Right.
What you can use around in a residential area versus what you can use in a commercial industrial area. Brian, is that your concern?
Yes, although I have to admit, I really can't ignore the what the potential ambient noise would be in this location, right next to the Glen Highway. So I'm just going to, I'm sure you have an idea of what that is. I'm not sure whether this, your operations would rise above the ambient noise from the Glen Highway or not.
I can't see that happening. I really can't. I mean, all of mainly our noisy equipment is all inside. Compressors and welders, we're generally working inside of our building.
No. Do you own this property now?
I do not.
So is your ownership contingent upon the change of this zoning?
It is.
So it is your intent then to follow through, you're investing in the rezoning and the replatting?
100%.
This operation there?
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
And I just have a technical question. Can you please spell your last name for the record?
Yes, it's M-A, B as in boy, E as in Edward, U-S as in Sam.
Perfect, thank you. And Commissioner O'Quinn?
Mr. Mabus, are you anticipating that your use will occupy all of the lots here, or will there be vacant land once you've built out your business? And if so?
I'm thinking that my overall intent is to build 2 10,000 square foot buildings. One of those would probably be leased out or inviting some other business into it. So I would operate out of one 10,000 square foot building.
Okay. You're not intending to lease out the other 10,000 square feet to a
No,
junkyard?
I am.
No, but to a junkyard or anything like that?
No noisy business. No,
Okay.
I'm just kidding.
I know I'm jumping in, but that's the point. He can.
Well, you know what?
You have-
Here's the way I look at it, though, is Eagle River is in drastic need of some industrial development, and I think that's one of the issues that we see the rise in this Eagle exit going on right now, is there's a lot of people out there that feel it's too locked in and that we can't go and be our own, go start a business if you want to start a business. And I think that's a little bit of the issue, is that we're all residential, and we don't want to be all residential. We do want to operate some businesses out of there.
No, don't get me wrong. I'm trying to find ways to make sure that if and when this sails through, if and when,
Right.
that we don't get that unintended consequence where you're pushing down on the balloon, something else is going to pop
Yeah.
up, and we got a residential piece of property
Yeah.
next door that I didn't know this was going to happen. Who's looking out after their interest?
Yeah.
We went through the notifications. We went through the community council. They didn't really respond. That concerns me.
And that's another thing, too. We did meet with the Eagle River community, not that, I don't remember who it was, but it was Chamber of Commerce Community Council. I think it was probably both of them, and let them know about a year ago what we were doing here. So we're definitely on the up and up, and I think the Eagle River community is inviting us to do this. That's a tough issue, is not being able to control what we can do. But, that's the zoning, so I don't know. I don't know what to tell you about that.
Chicken and the egg.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah.
Any other questions for the petitioner? Thank you. Is anyone else wishing to speak on this item? Seeing no one else, would you like to?
Thank you.
Yeah, I just wanted to talk about a junkyard or a use like that, but it's not unintended. Aren't there design standards that they have to meet that would create a buffer in between that of the residential area? So there's some protection there if they follow the code.
But yesterday, we didn't need any protection.
Right.
Today, we do.
Yeah.
That's the...
Well, but it exists. It exists.
Mr. Yale?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just to be clear, whether the impound yard is located in a B3 or an I1, screening standards apply for both districts, regardless. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other remaining questions for Commissioner or for staff? Seeing no further questions, what is the will of the body? Thank you. Commissioner Robinson.
In the matter of case 2019-80, request to rezone from Chugach-Eagle River RO and B3 to Chugach-Eagle River I1, I move that we recommend to the Assembly approval of this rezoning.
Seconded by Commissioner O'Quinn. Would you like to speak to your motion?
Yeah, I would. I think the rezoning application meets the 9 approval criteria as well as the specific criteria associated with the Eagle River Comprehensive Plan. There's been documentation of a lack of industrially zoned land in Eagle River. When talking about proximity to other uses and other zoning districts, if I look at the area, on this side of the highway, it strikes me as being predominantly industrial in nature. I think light industrial is probably the best use for this particular parcel, given that it probably wouldn't be a great straight-up commercial property. It's got great access for an industrial use, but I would not imagine it would be supreme for just general commercial. I think that in terms of having an actual proposed development that, as the petitioner stated, he's looked for several years to locate his business in Eagle River and had trouble identifying the land further, just supports the fact that there might be a need for additional light industrial land in Eagle River. That brings jobs and economic development to that community. And I don't believe that this rezoning would cause any adverse effects that you otherwise could have already done within the commercially zoned district. It's got good access. It will not create a traffic issue, in my estimation. So I'm going to vote to support my motion.
Would anyone else like to speak to the motion? I would like to just point out that we saw on page 23 that there was support for this rezone from the local community council, and that I also just want to emphasize what Commissioner Robinson said, which I agree with, is that any of the adverse effects that we have kind of was talking about with these junkyards, we would have had the same thing, it appears to be, with the B3 zone as well. So it appears as though there are mitigation factors in place if something were going to be built up that it was not intended by the petitioner at this meeting. All right, call for vote. And that motion passes. Moving on to case 2019-0087. Can we hear the report from staff?
Thank you, Madam Chair. This ordinance would amend Title 21 to allow connexes to be used for food and beverage kiosks. Currently, Title 21 requires food and beverage kiosks to have wheels like trailers so that they are readily movable. Connexes have not been allowed to be food and beverage kiosks because they do not have wheels attached, but they are considered readily movable. This ordinance will bring Title 21 into parity with the Health Code and the Building Code, which were recently amended by the Assembly to allow connexes to be mobile food units, which is the equivalent of a food and beverage kiosk from the Building Code. The department finds that the approval criteria for a text amendment, the three approval criteria is met, is recommending approval of forwarding the draft ordinance to the Assembly for adoption. Be happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Any question? Oh, Commissioner Robinson.
Yes, thanks, through the chair. So, Mr. McLaughlin, do you know whether or not, if you have a connex on a property, even a commercial property, that's an accessory use to that property, so presumably being used as storage or whatever, are you required to actually screen that connex? I recall thinking that you actually speaking to a local business owner recently, he said he's in the process of screening his connex because it's a code requirement. Is that true?
Well, Arias Balthazar doesn't know the code very well, if that's the person that you're referring to.
No, it's not, actually.
Okay.
It's someone that does very well because he sits on the Assembly. But anyway.
Okay. I'm sorry to, just because we know some people in common, I thought. No, you're not required to, in commercial districts, it's required to be in the rear of the principal structure, or alternatively meet the screening and siding and roofing requirements. Yeah, so there is a screening requirement if you put a connex in front of your commercial business.
And again, I don't have any issue with this proposal. I actually have an issue going the other way. So in effect, if you have a business, you actually have a higher level of scrutiny if you have a Connex as an accessory use than if you have the Connex as a principal use were this to pass.
Yeah.
And any thoughts on the logic of that? So we've decided these are okay to potentially locate in the middle of our business districts, but if they're on a lot with an existing building, not okay.
That is correct. In industrial districts, there's no screening requirement. These are allowed in all districts, but to your point that if a Connex is being used for storage, it must be behind the principal structure or screened. But if it is to be a food and beverage kiosk, then that requirement does not apply.
So
because it's the principal use.
If presumably we make the assumption that if it's used as a kiosk or a business, someone's going to make it look decent. I mean, that's the presumption, though. There's no design criteria here, but the presumption is, because all the pretty pictures that we see on Google and in other examples, they paint them up, they put signs on them, they put a nice awning and a door on them, right? I mean, I've looked at these myself.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the presumption, but not the requirement, right?
Right.
But if the presumption is that that's okay, and we're okay with that aesthetic in Anchorage, what would be the opportunity to also look at whether you can have a Connex and paint it up and make it look real nice as an accessory use on your property as well? Or should we be looking for some aesthetic criteria? Because at one point we decided in our code that it wasn't okay just to put a Connex. I'm just concerned about the inconsistency that we seem to be having here, because we've seen a couple of good examples of coffee shops or bars or restaurants, using a Connex.
It might be helpful to look at what is the screening requirement of a Connex being used for storage in a commercial district. So it is, except in industrial, commercial, and airport districts, Connex units shall be screened on sides facing abutting public streets and in residential properties by structures, landscaping, and/or fences at least as high as the unit, or alternatively shall be sided and roofed using materials and colors which are similar to materials and colors of the principal structure. If the unit is placed for seasonal use as something else, it just can be painted in this similar color scheme as the principal. One of the concerns about having Connexes be modified or screened is that then they would lose the ability to be readily movable. If they're modified, then they may not be able to be driven down the road and taken away from the site, which is one of the requirements of a food and beverage kiosk. Also, like screening structures and that wouldn't really work with a Connex that is being used for, say, a coffee hut or some sort of food service, right? Because it's just kind of out there. So the department considered, requiring Connex units to be somehow like spruced up, but backed away from that after having discussed it internally.
Okay, and just so final, section B4 says a kiosk may be located on the same lot as another principal use. So if that's the case, when that's the case, does this kiosk have to be screened in similar fashion to whether if it were a Connex?
You're saying that if a food and beverage kiosk is in a Connex and is on a commercial lot, then what?
Well, if I look at E2, B4, Roman numeral 4, kiosks may be located on the same lot as another principal use. So what we just ascertained is if I have a business or a principal use and I have a Connex, then I have to side said Connex, that's an accessory use, in a similar fashion to what the principal use actually is. That's what the screening criteria was. If I have just a Connex that's operating as a food and beverage kiosk, I don't have to do any of that. So my question is, when number B4 kicks in, when it's a Connex on a lot, but it has an additional, another principal use on it, does it have the same screening criteria, or is that like, does that not get a kick in, if you can follow?
I'm trying to follow. I think that the question is partly direct, but I was looking at the other section of code that deals with intermodal shipping containers. So with the ordinance before us, the draft ordinance, you're referring to the second page of it where it says kiosks may be located on the same lot as another principal use. And you're saying that if you could, are you saying that you could have a Connex that's being used for storage and a Connex that's being used for a food and beverage kiosk, and one would be required to be screened and the other one would not?
That's my question. This feels like a conversation I could imagine taking place at the permit counter. You know what I mean? Because I don't know. I'm literally asking the question, what would be the interpretation? If it's a kiosk, is it considered a principal use and therefore it doesn't have to screen itself?
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Which seems like the opposite rationale almost. It seems like it's reverse. Anyway, you've answered. I think I've highlighted what for me is an inconsistency in the code. I'm not inclined to support this unless we look at it holistically. I don't understand why we're making someone that could paint a Connex really nice and keep it as an affordable storage on a lot differently than if I sell mochas out of it. Just personal opinion. Thanks.
Commissioner Strike.
Thank you, and through the chair. Along the same line that Mr. Robinson had, and again, I'm looking at the unintended consequences. So for clarity, the food and beverage kiosk type scenario that we're talking about probably fits best with a lot of the coffee shops or the coffee stands that we see.
That's right.
Food carts. What are they considered? Are they considered kiosk?
Are you talking about the hot dog vendor on a push cart?
Sure.
No, that's something different. It's regulated by the building code as push carts in the health
code. I'm not asking
code.
who it's regulated by, but is it considered a food and beverage kiosk? And if it's not, what is it?
Okay, push carts are not structures. I don't think the zoning code deals with them at all.
Some of them are set up on trailers. They have wheels. They hook them up to the back of a truck. They move them in and out move them in the morning, move them out in the day.
Well, I mean, I think, so what I've seen in my experience is what you're describing is, in Town Square Park and different corners on the sidewalk.
Let's not.
And hold on, and Saturday markets and that. But if I stop for my mocha on the side of the road on a commercial lot next to a gas station, I have not seen a push cart.
Well, be careful of the term push cart because none of these can really be pushed. They're towed, they're manipulated, they're moved, they're dragged, and so forth. And they're hooked up to the back of a truck when they leave. So they're readily movable within a day. They do because they move them daily. I'm just again concerned about some unintended consequences because if one of those carts, kiosk, based on definition, could all of a sudden fall under this category. Can we all of a sudden see an 8-foot Connex or a 6-foot Connex dumped on the street of where they've got the lease downtown on 4th Avenue based on this language?
So I don't think there's anything in this ordinance that would change the push cart thing. In terms of your second question about could a very large Connex be used as a food and beverage kiosk, it could if this is adopted.
Because the terminology used here is, in the previous, the food and beverage kiosk must be readily movable. Now the language is moved to considered movable for a Connex. I will tell you that a Connex in its normal configuration is not readily movable unless you got a 966 loader, chains, a truck, a forklift. Now they can be moved in a day with planning and coordination. Connex weighs a lot.
It does not.
An empty one weighs a lot.
Mr. Strike, so I'm looking at the use-specific standards, and there's no requirement for it to be, let's see, factory-built intermodal shipping containers repurposed to function as kiosks must be readily available. Yeah, I do say that.
First paragraph.
Within 1 calendar day, yeah.
And then, yep. So I guess as we zero in on the intended use for these connexes, because again, definition of food and beverage kiosk. You heard of Benny's Food Wagon?
Yeah.
Been here in this state, been here longer than most of us all have. It's been here for 35 years.
Right.
40 years.
Right.
It's been moved 3 times.
Mm-hmm.
Took weeks for them to figure out how to get
Yeah.
it moved, and it's on wheels.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Well,
Is that a kiosk? Or is that a food truck?
No, that's a food and beverage. Well, that's actually an interesting question because it is a bus.
Again, unintended.
It's been treated, I think, by enforcement, code enforcement as a food and beverage kiosk, but it is a bus and not a trailer like the barbecue or places or the.
Well, it didn't move on its own. It was drugged
Yeah.
on a trailer and manipulated and moved to its current location.
Uh-huh.
So again, moving forward, food trucks. Could a food truck in an area that's zoned for food trucks where they move in and out, all of a sudden might we see locations where they no longer move? They use connexes now instead. We've got a piece of property that allows food trucks, and now they're set up in more permanency, although, albeit they can be moved in a day pursuant to the code. Are you aware? I'm thinking, because there's a group up here looking to do exactly that, and this ordinance here would spur them on. And you'd see you'd see acreage, you'd see lots in Midtown with a bunch of connexes now set up as little restaurants.
They can't be placed in required parking. They can't be placed in required landscaping. Your question is, hypothetically, would food trucks be replaced by intermodal shipping containers?
Could they be?
Well, I think the thrust of the ordinance is to allow more flexibility in food and beverage kiosks to use this other type. I hadn't thought about the food truck question, but
it's a lot cheaper to do a connex, build it as a food kiosk. You could probably do 2 of those to every 1 food truck, or even 3 to 1. So now there's a business model out here to say, take this ordinance, apply it, and just plant that Connex box, and then just staff it up as you need it, shut it down for the season, run it back up. I mean, I'm concerned with unintended consequences again.
Well, make no mistake, the purpose of this ordinance is to allow food and beverage kiosks to have a new structure type that would be allowed, to create flexibility in the code that a Connex could be creatively used as a food and beverage kiosk. That is what this ordinance is doing. How widespread it will be used, it would, who knows? Yeah.
Thank you.
I just have a linguistic question. In 2A, you define a food and beverage kiosk as being an intermodal shipping intermodal shipping containers, a Connex unit. And then I'm just a little confused why for 1, 2, 3, or for 1, 2, 4, and 5, you start every sentence with a kiosk, but then you're only having the readily movable requirement to the intermodal shipping containers. Is there a reason you're limiting it just to the intermodal shipping container section of a kiosk, or should it be applying to actually all kiosks?
Ms. Bailey, can you repeat the question?
So you define a food and beverage kiosk as it could be an establishment in a trailer, an intermodal shipping container, a Connex unit, or a vehicle on an impermanent foundation. And so then you set up different requirements in B, the use specific standards, in 1 through 6, you set up different standards. And these are all applying to all kiosks, except for item 2 is only applying to intermodal shipping containers, to a small subset of the kiosks. Is there a reason we're not applying the readily movable requirement to all kiosks?
Well, I think it speaks to Mr. Strike's concern that so we have trailers being used as food and beverage kiosks currently, but introducing shipping containers which don't have wheels, then we thought that this clarification was important when intermodal shipping containers be used as food and beverage kiosks.
We also just had another example that Commissioner Strike mentioned, which was something that would have been considered a trailer or something with wheels, and that was not readily movable. And so I'm thinking that this would make more sense if this requirement applied to all kiosks, not just to a small subset of the kiosks, because we wouldn't want it to have a trailer not be readily movable. We wouldn't want to have a vehicle on an impermanent foundation not be movable. I would think you would want all kiosks to be readily movable. Is there a reason that you wouldn't want those other 2 versions of kiosks to be readily movable?
No, you make a good point.
And it would just, in my mind, it would be more consistent with the wording of how everything else is set up. Item number 1 is kiosks shall comply, not just intermodal shipping containers. And for item 3, kiosks shall not be located on a permanent foundation. Kiosks may be, but for this one requirement, we're saying it only applies to our Connex units.
All right, well, we'll have to do a quick read of this. So, Ms. Bailey, are you suggesting that if we removed...
I would just remove the first part of the sentence so that it would start with kiosks must be readily movable off the site within 1 calendar day.
Okay, so then we got to look at where we say that intermodal shipping containers may be used for them. Let's see, does it say it elsewhere? That's really the only place that we say that you can do it. I guess you could break 2 into 2 different parts, that factory-built intermodal shipping containers repurposed to function, that may be repurposed to function as kiosks, and then kiosks must be readily movable off the site within 1 calendar day. And then that would achieve what you were seeking, which is making the readily movable part applicable to all, but still leaving in what we thought was important, which was to state declaratively that you could use an intermodal shipping container as a food and beverage kiosk.
But isn't that in the definition? In 2A?
2A.
An establishment in a trailer and
Oh, yeah, it
intermodal
does
shipping
at the top.
containers.
Yeah, it does say you can do it at the top. Okay, so it's already achieved. So, yeah, I'm fine with the change that you suggest,
Okay.
which is to remove factory-built intermodal shipping containers repurposed to function as. That could be deleted without losing anything and just begin with kiosks must be readily movable. And it would apply to all kiosks, which is your concern, the Benny's Food Wagon, and it would apply to intermodal shipping containers without needing to do that. That's a good point. That could be done. You could recommend approval of the ordinance subject to deleting the first part of that phrase in B2.
Commissioner Gardner.
This is maybe a hair late since you guys figured that out and got on the same page, but I hadn't noticed that point either, and I think that makes a lot of sense. I just wanted to say, in particular, because in the prior B2, which is now B3, we're striking the requirement that there be wheels on all kiosks, so that's no longer a limitation that would apply to non-Connex kiosks, and so I think this helps address that.
Thank you.
Commissioner Robinson?
Yeah, thank you. 2 things. One is, as I read 2A, and it says, establishment in a trailer, shipping container, or vehicle on an impermanent foundation that sells coffee or other beverages and food from a window to customers who are either pedestrians or seated in their automobiles, for consumption off the premises, and that provides no indoor seating. Can I ask a question? Are they allowed to have outdoor seating? I mean, it sort of implies that it's only for consumption off premises, as I read it.
Yeah, they're not allowed to have outdoor seating. It's for takeaway.
Say that again?
It's for takeaway.
But they all have,
No. Can you name one that has outdoor seating?
Green Goes? Green Goes?
he's
Say
a
that a
food
little louder?
truck, though, I think.
Oh, okay.
That's the difference.
Yeah.
Okay, so you're saying that's the distinction between, so a food truck, which is even less permanent, can actually have a seating, but these, I don't understand. It feels like we're not really thinking this through. You know what I mean? Why can a food truck have outdoor seating and these guys can't have outdoor seating?
A food truck can have outdoor seating.
I don't know if they can, they do.
Well, Benny's Food Wagon does not allow you to, there's no picnic table, there's no place to sit. I'm kind of wondering why we're talking about food trucks or hot dog carts.
Well, here's why. Here's why, Francis. Because I think we're looking at something in a very narrow window, and I think it would be better if we just looked at something a little bit bigger. What are we really trying to achieve? Is this a response to one guy? That's what I think. That's typically how these things come forward. In which case, I'd say, why are we looking at it for one guy? Why don't we look at it holistically? Do we want these sorts of things? Do we want to be able to set them up? The examples that I see in other places that I think other people have seen are actually, they create pretty cool spaces. Seasonal or not, even in winter cities, I see wintertime use of these things, but they allow seating. They require land. And my second question was going to be, did you look at any other cities' ordinances that allow these sorts of things? And if so, are there other sort of design criteria or conditions that are, kind of requiring them to make a cool space in urban areas or adjacent to a park or whatever it is? And I think, so as long as we look at it, let's look at it.
Well, these are intended for drive-through takeaway and not for on-site seating. You don't have a parking requirement would be triggered by having seating. I think that in
So I got it. You're looking at it very narrow. I'd like to look at it wider because I actually think there are opportunities, better opportunities, than simply saying instead of a coffee cart on every corner, I'm now going to see a Connex on every corner. And I don't think those actually do a whole lot to elevate either the aesthetic or the function of our community. I do think looking at things a little more holistically and creatively actually could have that potential. So, thank you.
Commissioner Strike.
Two examples in retort. 3rd Avenue and C Street, I believe that's a Connex. It's a half coffee shop, and I think they serve food. I believe they have outdoor seating. And that's an intermodal. That's a Connex box that was done up very nicely, by the way, with windows and lighting, and 2 thumbs up with them. A brewery that does not allowed to serve food promotes food trucks. Food trucks show up and they promote, bring your food and sit in while you're drinking beer. So there's ways around that people with food trucks have seating in that they're working. But I bring your point to number B5. Kiosks shall comply with the Title 16 and 23 requirements related to mobile food units. Is there a conflict with page 8 per AMC 16? Kiosk means a type of limited food service mobile facility without permanent plumbing located inside of a permanent building with a certificate of occupancy issued by the municipality. So is that going away?
You'll have to catch me up. You said page 8. What are we talking about here?
A letter, that's a note from the health department referencing AMC 16.60.050.
I'm not sure what Janine was commenting on. The health department, Jeff Hickman, who was involved with the drafting of the ordinance AO 2019-27 that's in the back of your packet starting on page 12. So the health department and the building safety division worked on an ordinance that was adopted changing mobile food units to allow Connexes. This is the companion ordinance that makes it allowed per the zoning. So we have the health code and the building code saying you can have a mobile food unit in a Connex. Now, this is an ordinance saying that you can, the zoning's equivalent of a mobile food unit, a food and beverage kiosk is allowed.
So I guess my point is that B5,
Mm-hmm.
should that wording be changed so it's not in conflict? Because I don't think you're accomplishing, unless I'm reading it wrong, you're not accomplishing what you're intending to accomplish, because AMC 16 all but says you can't do this. Yet you're saying kiosks shall comply with Title 16. Now, is it a different title? We're talking about Health Code 16 and Title...
No. Look, this draft ordinance I sent to the two people that worked on the health code change and the building code change, and they both said that this ordinance is consistent with the health code. The health department and the building safety division have looked at this ordinance and said that it's consistent with the ordinance that they had adopted a few months ago.
I might have a thought on that I don't know if this answers your question, Commissioner Strike, but I think the terms might be used differently in the different sections, and I think in the health code, they have mobile food units and kiosks.
Yes.
And a kiosk is a subset of mobile food unit, and so how Title 21 uses kiosk is different from how Title 16 uses kiosk.
And that no one sees a problem with that? We got to get consistent here, because who's the arbitrator here? Who's going to mediate this?
Well, what I'm saying is, I agree that probably consistency, just for ease of understanding and reference, is beneficial, but I don't see, in my reading of it, an inconsistency between the requirement for compliance with Title 16 and the definition of kiosk under Title 16.
And as I read the kiosk under the health, there's a group out there right now looking at building a structure that their intent is to put multiple kiosks. They want to build like a 10,000 square foot building and put like 15 restaurants inside this building with centralized seating out in the middle. And each one owned by different companies or different food truck vendors and so forth, but they would be permanent inside a building structure.
Through the chair, Mr. Strike, there are hotels, there are restaurants, there are many things that have used connexes in their architecture, and once a connex is used, you can convert a connex into a building, but it would have to be heavily modified, and it requires a building permit. It ceases to be a connex and then becomes a building. Connexes are temporary structures until you obtain a building permit. A mobile food unit through the building code, or our version of it in the zoning code, a food and beverage kiosk, is this temporary structure for this one purpose. If you were to build a hotel out of connexes, then it wouldn't be intermodal shipping containers anymore. It would be part of the architecture for a building. So what you described all of a sudden sounded pretty serious, but I just wanted to clarify that if you built a restaurant with connexes and provided seating, it would be required to get a building permit, and that would be...
Absolutely. And my point was to show this broad bandwidth of where the market is going and what different cities are doing, and what the term kiosk, our use of the terms are important, and how we interchange them or how we're redefining them means something, because the city looks at it, the planning looks at it one way, and I agree. In a building, the code will take place, and it's not movable, so it's not going to fit, and it's not even readily movable in the one scenario I meant. Now there's a version of outdoor version where they put a canopy and they put a bunch of movable intermodal containers with restaurants and food trucks and so forth, and they put 10 or 15 around, and they create a centralized seating area out in the middle with restroom facilities and so forth, permanent. And that's where this is happening down south, left and right, and slowly folks are looking up here, looking for land to do something similar. So we're going to get caught up in different definitions, and it all started with a food truck guy, or a food cart guy, push cart, with a guy with a hot dog stand selling hot dogs on the street, and it's morphed.
No, Mr. Strike, we've gotten off track. Okay, so food trucks, there's already a food truck rodeo that happens downtown. I haven't been to it myself, but what is it, K Street and whatever
I get
downtown?
that.
Yeah, that's
minor league.
Okay. The AK Alchemist, the other thing that you cited, that is a special sort of unique case where they do have seating there. One, it's in the downtown, the old zoning code. It's not applicable to this code that we're changing here. But the assembly has gone along with that. It's in a sort of a separate tract. The other instance that you cited was, the breweries. Breweries are allowed to serve food. They are allowed to serve food. It's just that
Some are, some aren't.
No, sir. No. Mr. Strike, the liquor license regulations for a brewery have no restrictions on, having kitchens and making food. It's just that the breweries are into brewing beer and not having kitchens and serving food, so they've been using these.
Well, the Girdwood Brewery has a conditional use that precludes it from doing food, and the zoning does not allow food at the Girdwood Brewery.
No, that's not correct. There's no prohibition. I recall you asking that question or raising it before. I thought I answered that. I looked into your claim, and it did not turn out to be correct. There's no prohibition on food service at Tim Cabana's property in Girdwood.
On that whole side of the road there was. We had a public meeting right here, and the Board of Commissioners from Girdwood stood up, and they made a conditional use that, that's what the conditional use for that side of the property was all about.
The GC-10, well, let's just look it up.
We can do it after the meeting, if you want.
It's GC-10. We'll just look at Chapter 9 to see it.
Yeah.
I think that, okay, so this is a good discussion. Some of this kind of blindsided me a little bit, but a little bit more of the history here. The Assembly the Assembly wanted Connexes to be allowed to be used as food and beverage kiosks, and so they asked their attorney to draft an ordinance making it so. And the ordinance had three parts. One was to change the zoning code, one was to change the health code, one was to change the building code. It was before the Assembly's Economic and Community Development Committee, and the Planning Department pleaded that they segregate out Title 21 so we could study it, and rather than them just adopting it at the next meeting. They honored that, and we took a look at it, and then essentially wrote up what they had written up. So the Assembly has directed the Planning Department to bring forward this ordinance to the Assembly. It would have already been adopted if we hadn't asked to be slowed down so we could bring it forward in a separate ordinance so we could consider it. So we waited until after the health code and the building code were adopted to allow this. They are, and now we're coming back with the changes to Title 21 to bring it into parity with the health code and the building code. That's why it's here today. Francis McLaughlin did not dream this up. The Assembly said this shall be allowed, and this is the ordinance that allows it per their wishes.
Commissioner O'Quinn?
So my question is concerning, the intensity of these things. So, we've been talking about these kind of food court type arrangements, and I understand that this is for walk up and drive up only and that sort of thing. But if I were to own, say, a vacant piece of property, how many drive up Connex food kiosks or trailered kiosks or any sort of kiosk could I have on my property?
There's no limit on the number of food and beverage kiosks one could have on a commercial lot. There is queuing requirements for drive-throughs and paving requirements. Also, the drive-through is required to be on the opposite side of the street. On the opposite side of the structure from the street. It can't be between the street and the food and beverage kiosk unless approved by the planning director.
Okay. Yeah, I think just the spirit of the Connex is that, it's somewhat permanent. and that's why people like them. They're simple, and they can drop them off, and they don't have to worry about them, and that sort of thing. And so I guess I like the way they look. I think they're cool and all that stuff, but it does seem to kind of change the nature of what this commercial use definition is by allowing it, even though, as you pointed out, and we worked through the movable and readily movable off of the site within 1 calendar day requirement. As we've seen, that's not generally how people have treated these things. So that's just a general comment that I have, and maybe it would make more sense to kind of approach this a little more holistically. And, if people want to build stuff out of connexes that aren't buildings, maybe we look at all sorts of uses, not just food and beverage kiosks, but, I don't know, Ulu stores or something. So, yeah.
Commissioner Robinson.
Yeah, I think building off of that, whether it's a food kiosk or a Connex that's now called a food kiosk were this to pass, there's no specific landscaping requirements or any of those other things that kick in because there's no building permit that's pulled for this, correct?
You're correct, Mr.
So, and I think I think the Benny's Food Wagon's a great example. A lot of these food carts have been in their locations for a long, long time, and a lot of them are even located in our core business districts. They're located in Midtown and Spenard and other places like that. And I believe when you talk to people that are actually brick and mortar retailers that have a hard go of it, and especially those that have to comply with codes or go towards conformity, have an issue with the fact that someone could just plunk one of these things down and not actually be required to do any of the other code required things that somebody does if they actually do invest considerably in their property. And that's the inequity that I have with it. I'd be okay with it if it's, in certain, kind of not in this core business issue, but then we're getting real, we're getting nuanced. But I think that's where, to Aaron's point as well, I like them too. I think they can be done well, but they are by definition more permanent than a food truck. And strikes me, if you're going to put one in our downtown core or in our business districts, then they ought to look more permanent and they ought to follow more of the other zoning requirements that other people have to follow.
Thank you.
Does anyone else have any questions or comments? Anyone from the public wishing to speak on this matter? All right. One thing that I'm struggling with on this issue is that I hear a lot of concerns that the rest of the commission has regarding the permanency of these structures, but I feel like most of those same issues are there with a trailer or with a vehicle on an impermanent foundation. Like, we already have those here, so one thing I'm struggling with is I do think that there is a problem that this should have been looked at more holistically to solve some of those larger issues that were spotted, but I'm not sure if those are outside of the scope of what is being asked here. And in looking at this, adding another type of kiosk doesn't seem to really make that much of a difference. Other than the fact that it creates one more use that can fit into it. But yeah, that is something that I am currently struggling with it. If this does get passed, I would hope that someone amends the language of B2 just for consistency. But yeah, any other comments from the commission or anyone wishing to make a motion? Commissioner Strike?
Yeah, and I'm going to a bit apologize. Don't take my thinking wrong, because I think this is a good idea. I just think that it's not all here. I think this is a subset of a broader use and plan and so forth that we could capture a lot of the nuances of what we're seeing in the marketplace and meet the Connex. I think the Connex idea is great. 2 thumbs up, all for it. Again, I'm concerned about misinterpretation, unintended consequences. I've used that about 8 times tonight. But areas that, how this might fit in holistically with the whole program, taking into account Mr. Robinson's thought process too, which I've got to agree with, that somebody who's got brick and mortar, they've got an investment, they've got different issues that for building codes and so forth. So having traveled throughout the country and going to a lot of the areas where they have developed sites, and it just, your jaw just drops, because what they're doing down south is light years ahead of where we are, but we're talking like we're already there. And so I'm just concerned that we have an ordinance here that gets us to what our brethren down south are already doing. And if they've got a good model, let's copy it. Thank you.
Commissioner Looney?
Yeah, actually, I was a little surprised because when I read this proposed ordinance, of course I thought it was a good idea. I keep thinking some of these kiosks I've seen around town that are really kind of bad shape, and they probably wish they could have started with a Connex. Some of these things are about to fall apart, and the Connex would be a little better foundation. I realize it can be moved. Probably as much as these other guys. It'll take a whole day to do it. They're not going to be easily moved, but this proposed ordinance will bring, will align with the health and the building ordinances that have been recently done. So I guess I was enlightened with the discussion we had today, but I still don't think it's a super bad idea. It just gives one more option. It almost seems kind of strange how a person who wants to put in one of these coffee shops can build it out of anything on a trailer, wherever it is, but he can't use a Connex. So this kind of really just makes it kind of almost more open. So I definitely in support of the proposed ordinance with the text modification that Commissioner Bailey was mentioning.
Commissioner Robinson?
Full disclosure, I own a Connex. It's one of my favorite personal possessions, by the way. It's a beautiful thing. My Connex, it's great. I guess to the chair's point, I think you're right. It's whether we look at this narrowly and sort of accept the existing conditions, or say, oh, now that we're looking at it, ought we actually do something about it? I think that's where I struggle, because like Mr. Looney, I drive by things that don't look good, and they don't look good, and they don't have to follow. And I deal with all kinds of things in the neighborhoods that I work with, whether they're car lots or kiosks, things that fundamentally don't have to pull a building permit, don't have to do a whole bunch of things that anybody else does. And I don't agree with it. If you're in our core business districts, we ought to have similar standards. Whether your structure can be moved or not, that's my belief. That's different than plunking one of these things down on the coastal trail and having it open for 4 months out of the year. That to me, or at Kincaid Park for the tour of Anchorage, that to me feels different than putting something down in a temporary fashion that ends up being there for 20 or 30 years.
Commissioner Gardner?
I was just wondering, as a procedural matter more than anything else, I'm finding this discussion really interesting, and I don't know if we want this as part of a motion, or does that make a difference in terms of, do we want to have a motion on the table so that these are kind of findings that make their way through?
That would probably be helpful.
Okay, well, I'll get that kicked off. So let's see, where are we? In matter of case number 2019-87, the text amendment to food and beverage kiosks. I move to approve what are we doing?
Recommend approval of the ordinance.
Recommending the ordinance.
Maybe with a change.
Yeah, and I'll throw into my motion, amending the proposed ordinance for...
I believe his motion is going to be including the amendment.
Yeah, including the revisions
Yes, the
to
revision.
2B2 to strike the terms factory-built intermodal shipping containers repurposed to function as.
And that motion has been seconded by Commissioner Robinson. Would you like to speak to that motion?
Yeah, so I guess I'm not fully decided yet myself, but I'm leaning toward voting in favor of the motion and recognizing, I mean, I think in the ideal world, we would have an opportunity to really look at the broad picture here, but I think I kind of tend to fall into agreement with the comments that Commissioner Bailey made earlier, which is that I view this as, a relatively narrow thing, and to me, I don't see a big difference between the variety of structures that are out there today that are, for all practical purposes, permanent, and having connexes be an available use for that same type of structure.
Would anyone else like to speak to the motion? Commissioner O'Quinn?
Yeah, I'd just like to second Jared's, Commissioner Gardner's comments. This is not going to make the status or the state of the Anchorage food kiosk scene any worse. It's probably only going to make it better and make it easier for business owners to open these things.
Commissioner Robinson?
Yeah, I have two issues. I mean, on the surface, I don't mind the structure themselves, but my two challenges are, one, when we have a connex allowed as an accessory use, we actually have additional screening requirements to that as an accessory use, whereas as a primary or a principal use, there are no screening requirements, and I just struggle with that inconsistency. Either we need to go one way or the other. Either we need to relax the one on the other as an accessory use, in my opinion, or we ought to have some sort of design requirements, or at least, we all have these really nice, beautifully painted images of connexes in our head with people smiling and grabbing good food out of them, but they could just as easily look as bad as some of those other kiosks that are sitting there run down. So that's my first issue. My second issue, and it isn't solely related to the connex. It's related to these uses that, frankly, end up not being temporary uses at all. They end up being permanent principal uses on lots for a long time, and they don't have to go by the same standards that anybody else has to follow. And I think that's a mistake when we look at trying to drive investment into our core neighborhoods. I'd be okay looking at this in some broader way, so allowing it, not requiring them to do everything that a restaurant would have to do, but having some standard. And with that, I'd be really curious to know if other communities deal with it in certain ways. So we use the Alaska Alchemist as the example of the sort of anomaly, but if instead of that being an anomaly, that was actually sort of more the norm, what would we drive standards to make that look okay? I would love to see those things. If I'm asked to vote on this tonight, I'm likely a no vote.
Commissioner Gardner?
I am curious, and this is directed to staff, I guess I don't have a very good sense of when that broader conversation would otherwise occur naturally, and to what extent this is an opportunity to go and look at some of those broader questions.
Through the chair, Mr. Gardner, I've been trying to figure out how this would go. I think that tomorrow I'll have to discuss this with the planning director and how we want to proceed. If I were to guess, I would think that the commission votes on it tonight, and I send you the resolution, the written form of your decision next month, and then try and get the findings to capture these comments that you're making now, which are very good, and this has been a good discussion, but that the ordinance, whether it gets recommended for approval or denial, gets sent to the assembly with that resolution attached for the assembly to decide on the matter.
And I guess so one challenge I see with trying to kind of open this up a little bit is how broadly or narrowly to try to cabin that, because I could see it, it could be like a huge detailed review in theory, it seems to me, or there might be ways to kind of make it narrower, and I don't even know if in the context of this, and I'm kind of just speaking generally here, if it even makes sense to do that for this. I guess I commented earlier, I'm kind of thinking it doesn't where we are, but I'm open to other thoughts.
Yeah. I would just like to comment that procedurally I want to thank the staff for identifying that this was a zoning issue. I think if you hadn't pulled this item, it would have gotten overlooked. Since this is most likely going to be going to the assembly either way, I would just recommend to the assembly that perhaps, while I understand why they're trying to rush something through, that there is the risk that they are doing so at the expense of fixing a larger issue at hand. And I'm still left with the same dilemma I had before, that yes, I could very easily have this change where a Connex is allowed to be a kiosk, and I see no negative consequences with that, and I actually see it could help bring some development and some much-needed foot traffic into our neighborhoods. But the risk is that we aren't looking at this holistically. I am inclined to support the motion. However, I would do so on the recommendation that the assembly probably should have looked at this with a wider lens to begin with. But I don't necessarily want any of the negatives I have are not with the emotion, with the ordinance as amended. And so being left with that, I am probably still going to support the motion, but urge the assembly that this should probably be looked at further. Commissioner Strike.
Yes, thank you, through the chair. I think one of the things we have to put out there on the table is that we're using the term intermodal shipping container Connex. Once these Connexes are cut into and modified and made into the structures of which what we see, they're no longer an intermodal shipping container. They're no longer a Connex. So we get hung up on the style of building that's being used for these structures. So whether or not one starts with a Connex and builds this structure or starts from scratch, these type of structures don't have to start as a shipping container. In fact, there's a system in place right now where people are building these that they don't start as shipping containers, but they start as the frame, and they build it so they don't have to use the same materials, because some of these shipping containers are not susceptible for certain types of construction, but the dimensions and the style and so forth remains there. Now, my other comment is, I don't know where this vote's going tonight. You talked about going back tomorrow and having a discussion and bringing back getting some additional information. Might an option be that we shelve this for tonight, we have a meeting on Monday, next Monday, bring it back on Monday for the final vote, with the caveat that we have your updated information? I would personally like to see this pushed through, but I don't know if the votes are there. But I think you may have some information that may swing some people one way or another.
The department is looking for a decision tonight, not a postponement. Thank you for them.
Commissioner Robinson.
Yeah, I just want to say for the record, I sort of object to the fact that the Assembly could have done this without. The Assembly really does not have the authority to go to change Title 21 without at least holding a public hearing at this body. I mean, I object to that. They can't. It's in code unless it's a small issue. So what we're doing here is totally within our purview. We're bringing up issues that affect our community and are likely to affect it much more in the future. As many have said, hey, we see this stuff like in a lot of different places, and guess what we have a whole lot of? We have a whole lot of connexes here, right? We got a lot. So we're likely to see stuff. So let's do it right. Let's embrace it. Let's do it in character with what we have. So I think I raised two issues. My third one is simply to ask the Assembly, under which circumstances is it okay to allow for seating on premises when you have these things? So look at the whole thing. Why do we have, to me, we spend all this time in our core central business districts to orient the parking to the backs of the buildings, to talk about whether or not drive-throughs are appropriate or not. And then we basically make it easier to create really easy drive-throughs that contradict a lot of the other things in our comprehensive plan. Why are we doing that? Because I suspect there's somebody that wants to put a Connex out there this year, and we're rushing to do it. So now that we have the opportunity, let's ask the questions. What screening is appropriate? Are they appropriate in all places? If they are more permanently situated, are there landscaping requirements? Are there seating requirements? Are there other aesthetic requirements that we want to look at? So thank you. I go forward to the Assembly, but I think there's some bigger issues that ought to be considered. And to the other Commissioner's point, yeah, it never comes up in the work plan unless you make it come up in the work plan. I truly believe that. And so maybe this isn't a big issue to people, but where I see it, it's offensive to me of what I am required to do from a requirement standpoint and what others are not required to do. And I think it's time we look at that. Thanks.
I also just want to make one more comment on another issue that I see in looking at the definition of what is a food and a beverage kiosk. It seems now a little odd to me that while I understand why an intermodal shipping container is allowed, why not a readily movable box that's not a shipping container? And so I think that's just another issue I think the Assembly should have looked at rather than trying to push through this one function. Yeah, I think from this, as you can see with the amendment we needed to make, or the revision that we wanted to make to 2B2, that it stopped being about kiosks and it started being about Connex containers. And I think looking at the kiosk itself and looking at what that use is, whether consumption can happen on or off premise, I think those are things that do need to be looked at, and I am now more inclined to vote no. I'm still open to having my mind being changed, but yeah, I think this could have used a little more time. Commissioner Gardner.
Yeah, while we're on the topic, just another related point to the one you just made, which is that the definition includes intermodal shipping containers, Connex units, but that language we struck is factory-built intermodal shipping containers. And I don't know if the intent was for 2A to be limited to factory-built or if there's an intended distinction between those two, but maybe another suggestion that it was a little quick in the process.
Anyone else was wishing to make findings or raise question or issues that we have not yet raised? Commissioner O'Quinn.
So where else in the code are connexes addressed other than as accessory uses for storage in certain zoning district or zoning designations?
Off the top of my head, the only other place that intermodal shipping container would be a term in Title 21 would be in storage, not storage yards, in self-storage facilities. When mini storage or self-storage facility employs Connex units, there's some phrasing in there but it's not relevant to this discussion. I mean, it's a stretch to say. But yeah, there are 3 places in Title 21 where you can read about intermodal shipping containers or connexes. The accessory use that Mr. Robinson and I have been sort of going back and forth about. This ordinance, which is before you, which is in the uses as a principal use, food and beverage kiosk, it's under restaurants and before bars, or in Chapter 5, and then in self-storage facilities. And then, of course, it appears in the health code and in the building code, and that's the ordinance that is attached to the back of your packet.
Thank you.
Commissioner Gardner?
Sorry, you may have touched on this earlier, but procedurally, if this motion fails, does that mean it goes to the Assembly with a no recommendation? Is that what happens?
That's correct.
Okay. And then is there an alternative option for us to ask for further review in some defined way?
Well, if I may, Madam Chair, I mean, I think that we could postpone, which we've heard is not the preference. We could approve it with this sort of suite of recommendations. I mean, in fact, my no vote is because I don't think we're looking at it long enough. So if they want, so it's sort of like, hopefully what's very clear is not just that the no might get their attention, but hopefully it's the issues that we're raising that kind of makes them look at it, which they would do whether it's a yes vote or a no vote, right? So I think that yay, nay, or postpone are really our options.
Yeah, just to speak to that item as well, I would not be prepared to do a sweeping review of looking at the 2 other ordinances that have already been amended and figuring out those compliance. I don't have the background research for it in front of me and am not prepared to do so on the spot. Just as a reminder, in getting back history, I feel like we had a fairly similar issue when it came to rooftop greenhouses, where it was something that generally everyone on the commission thought was a good idea, but just hadn't been fully looked into. And I believe at the time what we did is we voted no. The issue went in and got refined, and it came back, and it passed. I think that is where I am leaning towards myself moving forward and hoping that the Assembly might and City might also do as well. But does that sound correct to your recollection as well?
Yes, but it was a little bit different circumstance. The Mayor Berkowitz's sustainability goals for the municipality generated, the mayor directed the planning department to change or to eliminate zoning impediments to do things like rooftop gardens and solar panels. There were certain things that he had in mind that would be sort of cutting edge stuff with some other communities. And so the planning department drafted ordinances addressing those, removing those zoning obstacles to achieve those sustainability, and environmental goals that the mayor had. And I think that the commission didn't like the first iteration of a portion of one of those ordinances, and Ryan Yell went back and revised it and brought it back before the commission, and it was recommended for approval and went on to be adopted. And it was an ordinance that handled 2 different things in one ordinance, and I imagine that it was made improved. This is coming from the Economic Community Development, or the Community and Economic Development Committee of the Assembly, not the mayor's office. So it's a little bit different in that respect.
Yeah. Is there any more discussion on the item? All right, call for a vote. And that motion does not pass. And Commissioner Strike, were you hoping to end this meeting by a motion to adjourn? And motion by Commissioner Strike, seconded by Commissioner O'Quinn. See no objections, meeting is adjourned.